A poor single dad took in a girl for just one night, never knowing she was a millionaire's daughter. The rain came down in sheets, hammering the cracked sidewalks of Youngstown, Ohio, like it was trying to wash the whole town away. Tom Delaney, still in his janitor's uniform navy pants, a faded gray polo with the city's logo and neon yellow stripes that glowed faintly under the streetlights, trudged through the downpour. His shift had ended at 1:30 a.m., mopping the floors of a community center that smelled of old coffee and desperation. His boots sloshed in puddles, the cold seeping through to his socks, but he barely noticed. His mind was on Ellie, his 7-year-old daughter, asleep at home with Mrs. Ramirez, the neighbor who watched her when his night shifts ran long. He adjusted the strap of his worn backpack, the weight of his thermos, and a half-eaten sandwich pulling at his shoulder, and turned down Mahoning Avenue. The street was quiet, except for the rain's relentless drumming and the occasional hiss of a passing car, its tires spraying water across the asphalt. Tom kept his head down, his baseball cap shielding his eyes, but something made him pause, a flicker of movement under the dim glow of a street lamp near an abandoned lot. There, hunched against the wind, stood a young woman, maybe in her mid-20s, her dark hair plastered to her face, her thin jacket soaked through. She was clutching herself, arms crossed tight, as if she could squeeze the cold out. Her sneakers were muddy, one lace untied, trailing in a puddle. Tom slowed his steps, instincts kicking in. This wasn't a safe part of town at 200 a.m., not for him, and definitely not for her. The lot behind her was a known spot for trouble, broken bottles, stray dogs, and worse. He scanned the street, half expecting to see someone lurking, but it was just her alone, looking like she was one bad moment away from breaking. "Hey," he called, keeping his voice low but firm, not wanting to startle her. "You shouldn't be out here alone. This isn't a good place to be, standing in the middle of the night." The woman spun around, her eyes wide with panic, like a deer caught in headlights. Her face was pale rain streaking down her cheeks, mixing with what might have been tears. She took a step back, her sneakers slipping slightly on the wet pavement. "I don't need your pity." She snapped, her voice sharp, but trembling, her hands balling into fists at her sides. Tom raised his hands, palms open, staying where he was a good 10 feet away. The rain stung his face, but he didn't flinch. "Not pitying you," he said evenly. "Just saying, it's wet, it's late, and there's no one out here to help if something goes wrong." He nodded toward the dark end of the block, where the streetlights flickered and died. "I've got a couch, a dry towel, and a warm place. No strings. You can crash for the night." She stared at him, her eyes darting from his face to his uniform, then to the empty street behind him. Her lips parted, but no words came out at first. Her fingers, red from the cold, twitched as she hugged herself tighter. "Why would you do that?" she asked, her voice softer now, suspicious but curious. Tom shrugged, water dripping from the brim of his cap. "Because I'd hope someone would do the same for my kid if she ever needed it." The words hung in the air, simple but heavy. He saw something shift in her expression, fear maybe, or relief, but she didn't speak. The rain filled the silence, a steady roar that made the moment feel heavier than it should have. "What happened to you?" he asked, his tone gentler now, like he was talking to Ellie after a nightmare. She looked down at her muddy sneakers, her shoulders hunching. "Got robbed," she muttered. "They took my bag. My phone's dead. Everything's gone." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she bit her lip like she was trying to hold herself together. Tom nodded, letting the words settle. He didn't push. He'd seen enough people down on their luck in this town to know when someone was running from more than just a bad night. "You got anyone to call?" he asked. She shook her head, quick and sharp, her wet hair sticking to her neck. "I just need somewhere safe until morning." That's all." Tom studied her for a moment. Every instinct told him to walk away. He had Ellie to think about, a kid who depended on him, a life that didn't have room for strangers. But there was something in the way she stood, proud, but shaking, like she was fighting to keep her head up, that reminded him of himself after his wife Claire died 3 years ago. He'd stood in that same rain, figuratively and literally, trying to hold it together for Ellie. "All right," he said, finally adjusting his backpack. "I live 2 blocks from here. It's not fancy, but it's dry. You can have the couch for the night." She hesitated, her eyes searching his face for a trap, but then her knees buckled slightly, like the fight had gone out of her. "Okay," she whispered, barely audible over the rain. They walked in silence, Tom keeping a respectful distance, his eyes scanning the shadows. The streets of Youngstown were familiar to him, every cracked curb, every boarded-up storefront. But they felt different tonight, heavier with the weight of this stranger beside him. Her steps were uneven, like she was still deciding whether to bolt. When they reached his duplex, a small brick building with peeling paint and a sagging porch, Tom unlocked the door with a quiet click. The porch light buzzed, casting a weak glow over the chipped welcome mat. "Shoes off here," he said, pointing to a rubber mat just inside the door. "Couch is straight ahead. There's a blanket in the closet if you need it." He stepped inside, holding the door open for her. The living room was small but clean. The kind of tidy that comes from necessity rather than pride. A worn couch sat against one wall, a coffee table littered with Ellie's coloring books and crayons in front of it. A small TV perched on a stand next to a shelf with a few framed photos, Tom and Ellie at a county fair. Ellie's gap-toothed grin beaming. Claire laughing in a park, her hair catching the sunlight. The woman, Sarah, though Tom didn't know her name yet, stood just inside the door, dripping water onto the mat. Her eyes flicked around the room, taking in the pink backpack by the couch, the stuffed dinosaur tucked into a corner. She looked like she wanted to say something, but didn't know how. Tom didn't push. "Bathrooms down the hall to the right," he said, heading toward a small closet. "Water takes a minute to heat up if you want a shower." He pulled out a clean towel and an old gray hoodie, one of Claire's, that he hadn't had the heart to give away. "Here," he said, handing them to her. "Dry off, warm up. There's tea in the kitchen if you want it. Microwave's loud, but it works." She took the items with both hands, her fingers brushing the soft fabric of the hoodie. Her eyes met his, for a split second, confusion flickering in them, like she couldn't figure out why he was being so kind. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom rubbed the back of his neck, his calloused fingers catching on the damp collar of his uniform. "I told you, I'd want someone to help my daughter if she was ever stuck like this. That's all." She nodded, clutching the towel tighter, and headed toward the bathroom without another word. Tom waited until he heard the door click shut before moving. He slipped into the small back room he used as storage, filled with boxes of Ellie's old clothes and Claire's things he couldn't bring himself to sort through. He tucked his wallet and keys into a locked drawer, not because he distrusted her, but because habits die hard when you've lived on the edge of losing everything. Then he grabbed a spare blanket from a shelf and carried it to the living room. He set it on the coffee table next to a mug of hot water he'd microwaved, placing a tea bag beside it. On a scrap of paper he scribbled a note: "House phones on the wall if you need to call someone. Extra blankets in the closet. Keep the door closed. My daughter's a light sleeper." He left the note by the mug and moved quietly down the hall to the bedroom he shared with Ellie. Ellie was curled up under her dinosaur comforter, her small chest rising and falling, a stuffed turtle clutched in her arms. Tom stood in the doorway watching her for a moment, the rain's soft patter against the window, the only sound. He thought about the woman in his bathroom, a stranger who'd looked at him like he was both a lifeline and a risk. He didn't know her story, and part of him didn't want to, but he couldn't shake the feeling that she needed more than a couch for the night. She needed someone to see her, not just her problems. He closed the door softly and sank onto his narrow bed, the springs creaking under his weight. The rain was slowing outside, but the weight of the night lingered heavy as the water soaking his boots. In the bathroom, Sarah stood under the weak stream of the shower, the water barely warm, but enough to thaw her frozen fingers. The hoodie Tom had given her hung on the towel rack, its faded fabric smelling faintly of laundry detergent and something else, maybe the ghost of a life that wasn't hers. She scrubbed the grime from her hands, her mind racing. The robbery had been quick, brutal. 2 guys in hoodies, one with a knife grabbing her bag and running into the night. Her phone, her wallet, her ID gone. But it wasn't just the loss that shook her. It was the realization that she had nowhere to go, no one to call. Not her father, who'd lock her back in his gilded cage. Not her friends, who'd sell her out for a headline. She was alone, and for the first time in her life that felt both terrifying and freeing. She stepped out of the shower, drying off with the towel Tom had given her. It was rough but clean, like everything in this house, functional, unpretentious. She pulled on the hoodie, its sleeves too long, and caught her reflection in the foggy mirror. Her dark hair was a mess, her green eyes shadowed with exhaustion. But there was something else there, too, a flicker of resolve she hadn't seen in a long time. She left the bathroom, the house quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. The living room was dim, lit only by a small lamp in the corner. The mug of hot water sat on the coffee table, steam curling from it, the note beside it written in a steady, blocky hand. She read it twice, her fingers grazing the paper, then sank onto the couch. The blanket was soft, worn from years of use, and she pulled it over herself, curling into the cushions. The mug warmed her hands, the tea's faint bitterness grounding her. For the first time that night, she felt safe, not just from the rain or the streets, but from the weight of a life she'd been running from. She didn't know Tom's name, and he didn't know hers. He hadn't asked, hadn't judged, hadn't made her feel like she owed him anything. She closed her eyes, the rain now a soft whisper outside, and let herself breathe. Tomorrow, she'd figure out what came next. For now, she was here, and that was enough. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains of Tom Delaney's duplex in Youngstown, Ohio, casting pale stripes across the living room floor. Sarah stirred on the couch, the blanket Tom had left her tangled around her legs. The smell of brewing coffee and the faint clatter of dishes pulled her from a restless sleep. She blinked, disoriented, the events of the previous night crashing back. Rain robbery, Tom's quiet offer of a couch. The house was small, but lived in with Ellie's drawings pinned to the fridge and a faint hum of cartoons playing from a TV somewhere. Sarah sat up, her borrowed hoodie slipping off one shoulder, and rubbed her eyes. The coffee table held the empty mug from last night, the note still beside it, its words steady and unassuming. House phones on the wall. If you need to call someone. Extra blankets in the closet. Keep the door closed. My daughter's a light sleeper. She folded the note carefully, tucking it into the hoodie's pocket, unsure why she wanted to keep it. A burst of laughter, high and bright, came from the kitchen. Sarah stood, her bare feet cold against the linoleum, and followed the sound. In the small kitchen, Ellie, Tom's 7-year-old daughter, sat cross-legged on a stool, her curly blonde hair bouncing as she giggled at a tower of mismatched mugs she'd stacked on the counter. Tom stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with a spatula, his janitor's uniform swapped for a faded t-shirt and jeans. "Ellie, you're gonna topple the Leaning Tower of Pisa if you keep adding to that," he said, his voice warm but teasing. Ellie grinned unfazed and placed another mug, a chipped one with a cartoon dinosaur on top. "It's not Pizza, Daddy, it's Ellie's Tower of Awesome," she declared, her hands on her hips. Sarah hesitated in the doorway, feeling like an intruder. Tom glanced over his hazel eyes, catching hers. "Morning," he said, nodding toward the coffee pot. "Help yourself. It's not gourmet, but it's hot." Sarah managed a small smile, her voice rough from sleep. "Thanks." She poured a cup, the bitter steam grounding her, and leaned against the counter, watching Ellie's tower wobble. "Hi, Ellie," said suddenly, looking up with unfiltered curiosity. "You're the lady who slept on our couch. Daddy said you got rained on like a lost kitten." Sarah choked on her coffee, coughing into her sleeve. "A kitten?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. Tom smirked, flipping another pancake. Her words, not mine. "But you were pretty soaked." Sarah's cheeks warmed, but she laughed, the sound surprising her. "I guess I was. Nice to meet you, Ellie. I'm Sarah." Ellie beamed, her gap-toothed smile infectious. "You're nice. Are you staying forever?" The question caught Sarah off guard, her fingers tightening around the mug. "Just for now," she said, glancing at Tom, who was focused on the stove, his expression unreadable. Ellie let Sarah drink her coffee. "Before you start planning her life," he said lightly, sliding a pancake onto a plate. He handed it to Sarah with a plastic fork. "Eat. You look like you could use it." The pancake was slightly lopsided, golden, but uneven, and Sarah took a bite, the warmth spreading through her. It wasn't gourmet, like Tom said, but it was real, made with care, not pretense. She hadn't eaten anything homemade in years, not since her mother's death when she was a teenager. Her father's world of catered dinners and private chefs had replaced moments like this. "It's good," she said, meaning it. Tom shrugged, but a faint smile tugged at his lips. "Don't get used to it. Ellie's the real chef around here. She's got a black belt in burning toast." After breakfast, Tom cleared the plates while Ellie dragged Sarah to the living room to show off her coloring books. "This is my dinosaur book," Ellie said proudly, flipping open a page with a half-colored T-Rex. "You can color the Triceratops if you want." Sarah hesitated, then sat cross-legged on the carpet, picking up a green crayon. The simple act, coloring horns on a cartoon dinosaur, felt foreign, but soothing, like stepping into a memory she didn't know she had. Ellie chattered about school, her favorite teacher, and how her dad once tried to make a volcano for a science project that exploded all over the kitchen. Sarah listened, her guard lowering with each giggle, each earnest word. Tom appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Ellie, time to get ready for school. Mrs. Ramirez is walking you today." Ellie groaned but hopped up, grabbing her pink backpack. Sarah stood brushing crayon dust off her borrowed hoodie. "I should go," she said, though the words felt heavy. "I need to figure out stuff." She didn't elaborate her stolen bag, her dead phone, the fact that she had no plan beyond surviving the night. Tom studied her for a moment, his expression calm but searching. "You got somewhere safe to go?" he asked. Sarah shook her head, her throat tight. "Not really. My ID, my cards, everything's gone. I was just passing through and now I'm stuck." Tom nodded, like he'd heard that story before in this town. Youngstown wasn't exactly a destination. It was a place people ended up when life took a wrong turn. "There's a laundromat a few blocks away," he said. "My friend Maria runs it. She's always looking for extra hands. It's not glamorous, but it's cash under the table until you get your papers sorted." Sarah blinked, surprised. "You're offering me a job?" Tom shrugged again, tossing the dish towel over his shoulder. "I'm offering a way to stand on your own 2 feet. Up to you." By noon, Sarah was standing behind the counter of Maria's laundromat, the air thick with the hum of washing machines and the sharp scent of detergent. Maria, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with a braid down her back, handed Sarah an apron and a clipboard. Sort wash fold. Don't mix colors with whites unless you want a riot, Maria said, her tone dry, but not unkind. Sarah nodded, her hands clumsy as she loaded a machine with towels. She'd never done laundry in her life. Her father's staff had always handled it, but she wasn't about to admit that. The work was repetitive, her back aching within an hour, her fingers raw from folding hot sheets. Customers came and went, some grumbling about stains, others dropping off bags without a word. One guy in a stained Steelers cap snapped at her for folding his shirts wrong. Sarah bit her tongue, her pride stinging, but kept going. That evening she returned to Tom's duplex, her feet sore, her borrowed sneakers rubbing blisters. Ellie was sprawled on the living room floor, watching a cartoon about talking dogs. Tom was in the kitchen stirring spaghetti in a pot that looked older than Sarah. How was it, he asked, not looking up. Sarah dropped onto a chair, wincing as she kicked off her shoes. Hard, she admitted. I'm not used to any of this. She gestured vaguely at her stained apron, the blisters on her heels. Tom glanced over his eyes, catching the redness on her hands. First days are always rough, he said. You showed up. That's what counts. Over the next few days, Sarah settled into a rhythm. She stayed on Tom's couch, promising herself it was temporary, just until she could replace her ID and figure out her next move. She worked mornings at the laundromat, her hands growing tougher, her folding less sloppy. Afternoons were spent with Ellie, who insisted on teaching her how to make paper airplanes or braid her doll's hair. Sarah found herself laughing more, the knot in her chest loosening. One evening, she and Tom sat on the porch after Ellie went to bed, the air cool with the promise of fall. Sarah sipped a beer Tom had offered the bottle, sweating in her hand. Why do you stay here? She asked suddenly. In Youngstown. It's tough. Tom leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking. Born here, raised here. Ellie's mom Claire loved this place, even when it was falling apart. After she died, I thought about leaving, but Ellie's got her friends, her school. Roots matter. He paused, looking at her. What about you? What are you running from? Sarah froze the beer halfway to her lips. She'd been careful not to share much, no last name, no details about her life before the robbery. Just a life that didn't fit, she said finally, her voice low. Too many expectations, not enough air to breathe. Tom nodded, like he understood more than she'd said. Expectations can choke you, he said. But so can running forever. Their conversation was cut short by a flicker of headlights down the street. A black sedan idled at the corner, its engine low but unmistakable. Sarah's stomach twisted. She didn't recognize the car, but she knew the feeling, someone watching, waiting. Her father's world wasn't one you escaped easily. She'd seen cars like that before, hired by her father to keep tabs on her, to drag her back to his penthouse in Cleveland. You okay? Tom asked, noticing her tension. Sarah forced a smile, setting the beer down. Yeah, just tired. She stood, brushing off her jeans. I should crash. Early shift tomorrow. Inside, she lay on the couch, the blanket pulled tight, but sleep didn't come. The sedan's headlights lingered in her mind, a reminder of the life she'd fled, a life of private schools, charity galas, and a father who saw her as an asset, not a person. She'd left Cleveland after a fight with him, her bag packed with just enough to start over. But starting over meant money, idea, plan, none of which she had now. Tom's house, with its creaky floors and Ellie's laughter, was the closest she'd felt to free in years. But freedom, she was learning, came with blisters, sore muscles, and the constant hum of fear that her past would catch up. The next morning, Sarah walked to the laundromat, her eyes scanning the street for the sedan. It wasn't there, but the unease stayed. Maria handed her a stack of hotel linens, a rush order for a motel on the edge of town. "You're doing all right, kid," Maria said, her voice gruff but warm. "Keep up, and I might keep you around." Sarah smiled, her hands moving faster as she folded sheets. The work was hard, but it was hers earned, not given. She thought of Tom's words. "You showed up. That's what counts." For the first time, she felt like she was building something, even if it was just a stack of clean towels. That afternoon, she picked Ellie up from school, a favor to Tom, who was covering an extra shift. Ellie skipped beside her, clutching a drawing of a rainbow. "This is for you," Ellie said, thrusting the paper into Sarah's hands. "Because you're nice, and you don't have a house." Sarah's throat tightened. She knelt down, meeting Ellie's eyes. "Thanks, kiddo. This is the best rainbow I've ever seen." Ellie grinned, then grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the diner across the street. "Can we get fries? Daddy says they're the best medicine." Sarah laughed, letting Ellie lead the way. Inside the diner smelled of grease and coffee, its red booths cracked but welcoming. They split a plate of fries, Ellie dipping hers in ketchup with surgical precision. Sarah watched her, the weight of the last week easing just a little. But as they left the diner, Sarah froze. The black sedan was parked across the street, its tinted windows reflecting the fading sun. A man in a leather jacket leaned against it, his phone raised, snapping a photo. Sarah's heart pounded. She grabbed Ellie's hand, pulling her close. "Come on, let's go," she said, her voice tight. Ellie looked up, confused. "What's wrong?" Sarah forced a smile. Her eyes locked on the man. "Nothing, just let's get home." She walked faster, Ellie's small legs struggling to keep up. The sedan didn't follow, but Sarah felt its presence like a shadow. Her past was closing in, and she wasn't sure how long she could outrun it. But for now, she had Ellie's hand in hers, Tom's couch, waiting, and a fragile sense of belonging she wasn't ready to let go. The dusk settled over Youngstown, Ohio, painting the sky a bruised purple, as Tom Delaney pulled his beat-up pickup truck into the driveway of his duplex. The engine sputtered to a stop, and he sat for a moment, his hands gripping the wheel, the weight of the day clinging to him like damp clothes. His night shift at the community center had been grueling extra hours, mopping floors and scrubbing graffiti off the walls. But it was the unease in his gut that wore him down most. Sarah had been staying with him and Ellie for a week now, her presence both a comfort and a question mark. She was good with Ellie, patient, in a way that made his daughter light up, but Tom couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah was hiding something. Her guarded answers, the way her eyes darted to the street, sometimes it all pointed to a past she wasn't ready to share. He pushed the thought aside, grabbed his backpack, and headed inside where the faint glow of the porch light flickered against the chipped paint of the door. Inside the living room was quiet, Ellie's coloring books scattered across the coffee table, a half-finished drawing of a dinosaur with a lopsided smile staring up at him. Sarah sat on the couch, her knees pulled to her chest, still wearing his old hoodie, her dark hair tucked behind her ears. She looked up as he entered, her green eyes catching the lamplight. "Ellie's asleep," she said softly, nodding toward the hallway. "She wanted to wait up for you, but she crashed after 2 chapters of her dinosaur book." Tom nodded, dropping his backpack by the door. "Thanks for watching her," he said, his voice rough from exhaustion. He headed to the kitchen, pulling a beer from the fridge, and offered one to Sarah. She shook her head, her fingers twisting the hem of the hoodie. "You okay?" he asked, noticing her tension. Sarah hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I saw that car again today," she said finally, her voice low. The black sedan. It was outside the laundromat when I finished my shift. Tom's grip tightened on the bottle, his jaw clenching. He'd noticed it too, a sleek car that didn't belong in Youngstown, idling at the corner a few nights ago. You know who it is? He asked, keeping his tone even. Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment he thought she wouldn't answer. Someone from my old life, she said at last. I left things behind. People who don't like being left. Tom leaned against the counter, studying her. You in trouble? She shook her head, but it wasn't convincing. Not the kind you're thinking of. It's complicated. Before he could press further, a sharp knock at the door cut through the quiet. Tom's instincts kicked in, his body tensing as he set the beer down. Sarah's eyes widened, her breath hitching. Stay here, Tom said, moving to the door. He opened it a crack. The chain lock still in place, and peered out. A man stood on the porch, tall and imposing, his silver hair combed back, his tailored coat out of place against the peeling paint of the duplex. Behind him, a black sedan idled in the driveway, its engine a low hum. Two men in dark suits flanked the porch, their postures rigid like bodyguards. I'm looking for my daughter, the man said, his voice cold and clipped, carrying the weight of someone used to being obeyed. I know she's here. Tom's heart thudded, but he kept his voice steady. Who are you? The man's eyes narrowed, his gaze flicking past Tom into the house. Richard Langley, Sarah's father. Tom glanced back at Sarah, who stood frozen in the living room, her face pale. Sarah, Tom called, not taking his eyes off Langley. This guy, your dad. Sarah stepped forward, her hands trembling, but her chin lifted defiantly. Yes, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Langley pushed past Tom, ignoring the chain lock as it strained against the doorframe. Enough of this, Sarah, he said, his tone sharp. Get your things. We're leaving. Tom stepped in front of Langley, blocking his path. She's not going anywhere unless she wants to, he said, his voice low but firm. Langley's eyes flicked over Tom, taking in his faded t-shirt, his calloused hand, the modest house behind him. You're the janitor who's been hiding her. Langley said, his lip curling slightly. This place, your life, it's beneath her. Sarah's voice cut through, sharp and steady now. Stop it, Dad. This isn't your call. Langley turned to her, his expression a mix of anger and disbelief. You'd choose this, a rundown house, a man who scrubs floors for a living over everything I've given you. Sarah's eyes glistened, but she held her ground. You gave me things, Dad, not a life. The tension hung heavy, the only sound the faint hum of the sedan outside. Tom stood his ground, his body a barrier between Sarah and her father. She's safe here, he said. She made her choice. Langley's gaze hardened, but before he could respond, a small cry came from the hallway. Ellie stumbled out, her dinosaur pajamas, wrinkled, her face flushed and sweaty. Daddy, she mumbled, her voice weak. Tom's heart sank. He knelt beside her, touching her forehead. She was burning up her skin, hot and clammy. Ellie, what's wrong? He asked, his voice tight with worry. Sarah was at his side in an instant, her hand on Ellie's shoulder. She's got a fever, Sarah said, her voice urgent. We need to get her to a doctor. Tom scooped Ellie into his arms, his mind racing. The nearest hospital was 10 minutes away, but his truck's gas tank was nearly empty, and his wallet held less than $50. Langley watched, his expression unreadable. I'll drive, he said, gesturing to the sedan. Tom hesitated, every instinct screaming to keep Ellie away from this man. But Ellie's shallow breaths made the decision for him. Fine, he said, carrying Ellie to the car. Sarah followed her face tight with worry, and something else, guilt, maybe, or fear. The drive to the hospital was silent, the sedan's leather seats a stark contrast to Tom's beat-up truck. Langley sat in the front, his driver navigating the rain-slicked streets, while Tom held Ellie in the back, Sarah beside him, her hand resting lightly on Ellie's knee. At the hospital, the emergency room was a blur of fluorescent lights and beeping machines. A nurse took Ellie to a treatment room, her small body dwarfed by the stretcher. Tom paced the waiting area, his boots scuffing the linoleum, while Sarah stood by the desk arguing with the receptionist. "We need a deposit," the woman said, her voice flat. "$6,000 for admission and tests." Tom's stomach dropped. He pulled out his wallet, knowing it was useless. I can pay some now," he said, his voice cracking. "I'll cover the rest soon." The receptionist shook her head, her eyes sympathetic but firm. "Hospital policy." "I've got it," Sarah interrupted, stepping forward with a credit card. "Put everything on this. Room tests, medicine, everything." The receptionist hesitated, glancing at Tom, then took the card. "Relation to the patient?" she asked. Sarah looked at Tom, her eyes steady. "Family," she said simply. Tom froze his breath, catching. Langley, standing a few feet away, watched in silence, his jaw tight. The nurse returned, saying Ellie had a viral infection, treatable with fluids and rest, but she'd need to stay overnight. Tom followed her to Ellie's room, his mind reeling. Sarah had just paid thousands without blinking, and the word family echoed in his head. In Ellie's room, Tom sat by her bed, his hand wrapped around her small one. She slept, her fever easing and IV dripping steadily. Sarah stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Tom looked up, his voice low. "You didn't have to do that." Sarah shrugged, stepping inside. "I know, but I wanted to." Tom's eyes searched hers, looking for answers she hadn't given. "That card? It's not a broke traveler's card," he said, his tone careful but firm. "Who are you, Sarah?" She sighed, sitting in the chair beside him. "My last name's Langley," she said finally. "My father's Richard Langley, the tech mogul. I ran away because his world, his money, his control was suffocating me. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to see me as that. I wanted to be just Sarah." Tom leaned back, processing her words. The pieces clicked: her guardedness, the sedan, the way she flinched at certain questions. "You lied to me," he said, not accusing, just stating a fact. Sarah's eyes glistened. "I didn't lie. I just left things out. I'm sorry." Tom nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to Ellie. "I don't care who your dad is," he said, "but I need to know who's in my house around my daughter." Sarah nodded, her throat tight. "I get it. I'll tell you everything, just not tonight. Tonight's about her." The next morning, Ellie was stable, her fever down, though she'd need another day in the hospital. Tom stayed by her side, but Sarah was gone when he returned from getting coffee. A nurse handed him a note in Sarah's handwriting. "I'm handling something. I'll be back." Tom's chest tightened, but he focused on Ellie, reading her favorite dinosaur book, until she dozed off. That evening, Sarah returned, her coat damp from the rain. "I went to see my father," she said, sitting beside him. "I told him I'm not going back." Tom raised an eyebrow, surprised. "What did he say?" Sarah's lips twitched a half smile. "He didn't like it. But I'm done living his life." She told him about the confrontation at her father's hotel suite in downtown Cleveland, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that felt like another world. Richard Langley had sat behind a desk, his face a mask of control, offering her everything: money, security, a future as his heir. "You're throwing it all away for a janitor?" And his kid, he'd said, his voice dripping with disdain. Sarah had stood her ground, her voice steady. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm choosing a life that's mine. Tom and Ellie, they're real. They don't want me for what I can buy. They just want me, Langley had scoffed, but something in his eyes faltered a crack in his armor. You'll regret this, he'd said, but he didn't stop her as she walked out the city lights sprawling below, none of them calling her back. Now in the hospital room, Sarah looked at Ellie, then at Tom. I meant what I said about family, she told him. You and Ellie, you've given me something I never had. A place where I'm enough just as I am. Tom's throat tightened, but he didn't speak. He just nodded his hand, still holding Ellie's. Sarah leaned back, her eyes on the ceiling. You told me once that showing up matters, she said. I'm showing up now, for good. Tom met her gaze, his voice low. This life, it's not easy. No fancy cars, no big bank accounts. Sarah smiled, soft but sure. I don't need those. I need this. 2 months later, the air was crisp with autumn, and Youngstown's community park buzzed with Saturday morning energy kids chasing soccer balls, dogs barking, the smell of grilled hot dogs in the air. Tom's old pickup truck was parked at the edge of the park, its tailgate down, transformed into a makeshift food stall. A hand-painted sign read, Tom's Tasty Bites, wraps, muffins, coffee. Sarah's idea, born from late-night talks about making something of their own. She stood at a portable grill, flipping breakfast wraps stuffed with eggs and bacon, her hair tied back, a smudge of flour on her cheek. Tom took orders, his voice calm but warm as he chatted with regulars. Ellie, wearing a tiny apron, handed out napkins and dinosaur stickers, her grin brighter than the morning sun. A customer, an older man with a Steelers cap, took a wrap and winked at Ellie. You're the best server in Ohio, kid, he said. Ellie giggled, handing him a sticker. Sarah caught Tom's eye and he smiled, mouthing, You're doing great. She grinned back, her heart full. This wasn't the life she'd been raised for. No penthouses, no private jets. But it was hers, built with her own hands, alongside people who saw her for who she was, not what she could buy. As the morning wound down, Sarah sat with Ellie on a picnic blanket, sharing a muffin. You know why I stayed? Sarah asked, brushing crumbs from Ellie's chin. Ellie tilted her head, curious. Because you like dinosaurs. Sarah laughed, pulling her close. Because you and your dad taught me something. Home isn't a big house or a lot of money. It's where people care about you, where you feel safe and strong no matter what. That's worth more than anything. Ellie nodded, her eyes serious. Like when Daddy reads me stories even when he's tired, Sarah's throat tightened. Exactly like that. The lesson was simple but profound. One Sarah hoped anyone listening would carry with them. True wealth isn't measured in dollars or status, but in the trust and love you build with others. It's in showing up, in choosing kindness over control, in finding a home in the people who see you as enough. For Sarah, Tom, and Ellie, that home was here in a small town, in a park, filled with laughter, in a life they'd chosen together.